If you look at the intake of red meat, rich in saturated fat, whether it's beef or lamb, you can see that since the mid-70s, consumption of red meat has gone down substantially. If you look at our consumption of butter, you can see that that's gone down quite dramatically, although it started falling in the mid-70s and got to a low in the early 90s. Even more remarkable is our changing in habits of the type of milk we drink. Back in the mid-70s, we'd hardly heard of reduced fat milk, whether it be skim milk or semi-skim milk. And then, as it became common and commonly available, you can see we've dramatically reduced our intake of whole milk, and we've increased our intake of skim milk. However, more remarkably, despite these changes that we've brought about in our diet, we have stubbornly refused to give up saturated fat intake. There was some movement between about the middle of the 1970s and early 1990s, and since then we have stayed at about 13 or 14% of our total energy intake as saturated fat, stubbornly above the 10% which has been recommended. So why, if we've changed our meat intake, if we've stopped eating butter, if we've stopped eating full fat milk, why is our saturated fat intake still so high? Well, unfortunately, the fat that we take out of the milk when we make skim milk doesn't necessarily get thrown away. It goes back into the food chain in other foods. It goes into processed foods. We've reduced our intake of full fat milk, but we've increased our intake of cream. And all sorts of different processed foods, takeaways, for example. And basically, we have replaced those sources of saturated fat with different sources of saturated fat, and overall we've hardly reached our target. So if that's the case, what's happened to the incidence of heart disease over that period? Well, the good news, and I feel that the news that perhaps isn't really talked about enough, is that it has decreased quite dramatically. Even without taking notice of Ansel Keys and everybody else about changing our saturated fat intake, year on year we have reduced the deaths in people under the age of 75 from heart disease, all the way from the mid-70s, all the way up to, I think this data goes up to 2007. Now, I started my PhD in 1978 working in this area, so I'd like to take full credit for all of these decreases year on year. But I don't think I'd get away with that somehow. So if we haven't changed our diet, if we haven't responded with these changes which are reducing our plasma cholesterol, why, year on year on year, have we seen this decrease in heart disease? Well, I can't give you the full answer, but I can give you part of the answer. This was an analysis which was done looking at the difference in heart disease between 1981 and the year 2000. Looking at all the factors that have changed. And there's one single factor there that is by far the biggest change in the so-called risk factors for heart disease from them all. And it's that top one. Between 1981 and 2000, smoking decreased by 34% in this country. And it's estimated that by that single change, 48% of the decrease in heart disease is directly attributable to the decrease in smoking. It's a major success story. We did something right for once. We got people to stop smoking, a significant number of people to stop smoking, and you can see directly the consequences of that. We've had a significant reduction in the number of deaths. We need more people to stop smoking, obviously, but it is one of the successes of public health campaigns, if you like, in terms of getting people to reduce an activity which is bad for them. And a more modest reduction in the overall population blood pressure of about 10%. Plasma cholesterol over that period, it's estimated contribute about another 10% decrease, so not particularly strong effect of that. But there's three things at the bottom there which have become rather worrying. While smoking, blood pressure and cholesterol have gone down to various amounts, and that's improved our risk. I think deprivation refers to social deprivation, which has improved, and that's improved our risk. those benefits have been offset by some adverse changes in some other things. And that's what most nutritionists and most people interested in public health are particularly concerned about at the moment. A decrease in physical activity of 30% between 1980 and 2000, a massive 186% increase in obesity, and a 65% increase in diabetes have all been predicted to have partly offset the benefits of those other risk factors. And that was in 2000. Things have got steadily worse since then. And really, the major public health problem at the moment that most people foresee in the Western, the industrial world, is this so-called epidemic of obesity and diseases related to it. That is the most recent data I could find for the population body mass index for the UK in men and women. Body mass index is a measure of obesity. It's your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. And it's a scale which is universally used to describe people's weight. In general, when this classification was invented, if you like, having a BMI between 18.5 and 25 was regarded as normal. If you're under 18.5, you're regarded as underweight. Between 25 and 30, you're regarded as overweight. 30 to 40, obese. And over 40, you were seriously obese, you were morbidly obese. If you look at where we are now, you see that, particularly in males, that classification is probably a little bit misleading. There's only the youngest group there, the 16 to 24-year-olds, where the so-called normal classification is in the majority of people. So in young men between 16 and 24, about 60% of them fell into the 18.5 to 25. As you move into the older groups of men, in every single group, the predominant group now is the so-called overweight one. With increasing numbers as you get older in the obese groups. Women, in general, seem to stay slightly leaner for longer, and that normal group is the predominant one right up to about the age of 34, and then we start to change. But in general, the number of women who are classified as obese, again, is quite similar to that in men. If you look at all of that data put together, this data in 2006, and the estimates which are going to come out more recently, I think are going to say it's even worse. About a quarter of our population in this country are now classified as being obese. What I want to talk about is the consequences of that. Does it really matter? But first of all, I think it's worthwhile talking about why we're getting fat. And this is an exercise I did in the summer with the food science summer school students who came. I won't make you sit down and do all the calculations and tell me what the answers are, but I asked them to think about how much weight you'd put on if you ate 4 Mars bars a week above what your normal requirements are. So the extra you're eating is only 4 Mars bars. Half a Mars bar a day for 6 days a week, and then you'll have a blowout on a Sunday and have a full Mars bar. What happens if you do that? And I also asked them to work out how would they prevent the weight gain that was associated with it. And I think most of them were quite surprised when they did the calculations, looking at the energy content of a Mars bar. I've got nothing against Mars bars, by the way, I just chose it as a common currency. Looking at the amount of energy you've got in a Mars bar and the amount of energy that you have in a gram of your fat, your adipose tissue. And it worked out that over a year, just eating 4 extra Mars bars a week, you would put on about 12.7 pounds. If you did that over 5 years, you'd put on 4.5 stone. If you wanted to avoid that, you'd have to do the equivalent exercise of running between 12 and 16 miles a week.